I will get straight to the point. The train of death. This train, named the train of death, was no ordinary train. Those who had heard of it avoided it at all costs, avoiding a train with no name, no station, no destination. Those who had tried to board it never returned. No one knew where the train came from, nor why it appeared. It only came on those rainy nights when the night sky covered everything, and all sounds were drowned in the eerie silence of the deep forest. Stories told that the train never stopped anywhere. There were no stations, no one to greet it, just passengers who would never return. One night, a group of young friends, Jack, Emma, Dylan, and Olivia, driven by intense curiosity, decided to uncover the mystery of this strange train. They had heard it only appeared on rainy nights, and that it could be found in an unnamed deep forest. Everyone in the village warned them, saying the train was not just a form of transportation, but a gateway to places beyond imagination, a place from which they could never escape. They were not afraid. On the contrary, their curiosity urged them on, as if an invisible force was pulling them toward the train. They had no idea that this would be a fateful decision, one that would lead them on a journey they could not turn back from. Standing under the heavy rain, a strange sound echoed through the stillness. It was the sound of a train whistle, a long, haunting sound that seemed to come from deep within the forest. From afar, they saw the dim light of the train rolling toward them, with no driver in sight, just long, dark carriages like a monstrous creature ready to devour anyone who dared approach. As they stepped onto the train, a cold gust of wind swept through, carrying the smell of damp earth and the foul stench of uncollected trash. The door of the carriage slammed shut with a ghostly creak. Inside the train, it was pitch black and no one else was present, but they could feel the presence of an invisible force, eyes unseen yet watching them. The lights on the train flickered weakly, casting dim glows over the old, dusty seats. Every time the train rocked, there was a sound like chains dragging across the floor, making their hearts feel heavier. Everything seemed to go quiet except for the sound of the wheels rolling over the tracks. The train did not stop. The scenes outside the window grew more and more indistinct, as if they were covered by a thick fog. Giant ancient trees reached out from rocky cliffs, and paths led into dark caverns that seemed to swallow everything. At times, they glimpsed shadowy figures in the distance. Occasionally, a face, with eyes wide open and staring directly at them from the window, sent chills down their spines. But every time they turned to look again, the image would disappear as if it had never existed. A chilling cold enveloped them, and at that moment, a noise came from the back of the train. It was the sound of footsteps, but not from anyone in their group. The footsteps were heavy and uneven, like someone struggling to walk in pain. The feeling that they were being watched gradually grew stronger. Emma saw a figure standing silently in the corner of the carriage. The face was blurry, unrecognizable, but from the gaze, Emma could sense a despair and suffering beyond measure. The figure slowly passed by her without a word, leaving behind a cold breath, as if it had been long since the person had been alive. "We shouldn't be here," Dylan muttered, but when he turned back, the figure had disappeared. The air grew heavy with eerie whispers, echoing from the empty seats to the dark voids by the windows. At that moment, a strange sound arose from beneath the train. It was a roar, like a beast awakening. The train suddenly took a sharp turn, causing the group to nearly tumble. The train passed through bizarre areas, not the usual forests, but places where no light could penetrate, leaving behind an endless darkness that seemed to swallow everything. "This train is not of human origin," the strange man, who they had thought was just another passenger, said. "It belongs to the souls of the dead, those lost in parallel worlds from which they can never escape. And you are the next souls." His words left the group breathless. Everything they saw began to fade, as if there was no way out. Everything around them seemed to belong to a reality that was no longer theirs. Whispers grew louder, ghostly figures passed through like hollow images, and they felt as though something was trying to pull them away from this reality. This train was no ordinary ride. It was a gateway to another world, a place where life and death blurred into one. And they were standing at the fragile boundary between two worlds, unsure whether they would ever return. They boarded the train, and the automatic door slammed shut behind them with a heavy creak. The train began to move, but there was no sound except for the rolling of the wheels on the tracks. The lights in the car were dim, not bright enough to clearly see each other's faces. Everything around them began to fade, as if they were lost in another world. A cold breeze blew through, carrying the smell of mildew and an indescribable stench of uncollected garbage. The atmosphere inside the train was gloomy, and although there were shadowy figures passing by, they couldn't make out who they were. The only passengers were the friends in the group, and no matter what, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the darkness, they began to hear footsteps, not from anyone in their group, but from other places in the train. The footsteps were heavy and uneven, like someone struggling to move in pain. Occasionally, a figure appeared, standing in the corner of the train, then disappeared the moment they looked back. Emma suddenly felt a cold stare directed at her. She couldn't recognize the face, but the deep, emotionless eyes stared at her, sending chills down her spine. She quickly turned away, but immediately, the figure vanished back into the darkness. "We shouldn't be here," Dylan muttered, but when he turned around, the figure had disappeared. The eerie whispers began to echo around them, from the empty seats to the dark voids near the misty windows. The train passed through a bizarre area, not the usual forest, but places where there was no light, where darkness reigned. The windows of the train grew foggy, and the scenes outside no longer resembled the reality they knew. They saw endless roads, abandoned houses that seemed to have existed for a very long time. Then, from a distance, they saw a figure standing under the dim light of the train. It was a woman, her face pale, her eyes hollow, wearing a white dress stained with dirt. She stood there, saying nothing, just staring at them with emotionless eyes, as though they were lost souls in this world. As she moved closer, a strange sound came from her throat, not words, but a whispering, as if she were calling someone's name. Jack, Dylan, Emma, and Olivia stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Strange footsteps echoed from all directions, and ghostly figures passed by them like blurry images from the past. "This train is not of human origin," the strange man from the front of the train said. "It belongs to the souls of the dead, souls lost in parallel worlds from which they can never escape. And you are the next souls." His words caused their hearts to stop. Everything around them suddenly became blurry, as if space and time were stretching out. They could not turn back. They could only move forward, lost on a train that never stopped. The train continued to move, but this time, they were no longer passing through scenes of the real world. Strange images appeared before their eyes, memories they had long forgotten. A part of them appeared in each bizarre scene. Wrong choices, decisions that couldn't be undone. Each time the train stopped, they faced a part of themselves, a dark side they had tried to bury in their minds. These memories were not of other people. They were their own memories, events they could not change. And in that moment, they realized that this train was not just a gateway to parallel worlds, but a journey into their own souls, where they had to face the worst parts of themselves. When they realized there was no way out, no other choice, they finally understood that only by facing their fears, confronting the truth about themselves, could they escape this train. But could they do that? The answer was no. The train was not a path that could be traversed. It was a challenge they had to overcome within themselves. And if they didn't, they would forever be a part of the train, endlessly moving through the darkness of parallel worlds. The group of friends never returned. The train had taken them into another space, one that no one could explain. Their souls continued to drift through blurry worlds, while everyone in the village could only hear stories of the train, and no one dared to board it.